All right, I think we're live, guys. So give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can hear this, if this is working. Let us know where you're from. I see Karen just said hello, everybody from North Carolina. So this is a special alert, guys, for Sunday night, June 22nd. We're going to talk about events that are taking place in the Middle East right now because I think we've really seen a major escalation in the last less than 24 hours, really. And so this all stems from we put out a video on the Substack yesterday. I recorded that on Friday because we had to take our daughter to a camp yesterday, so we were gone almost all of Saturday. And in that, we talked about the prospect for a major event that could take place that would possibly trigger a black swan event in the global financial markets, and that we were seeing signs that that was going to happen. And the biggest part of that, the launching pad for that event, is the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And so, in the time since we recorded that video, and again, that's over on brittgillette.substack.com. It's for paid subscribers. That's how we pay our bills here. But if you're experiencing a financial hardship and you want that, just send me a message over there. Let me know. No questions asked. We provide those subscriptions for free. We don't want anyone to miss out on the content on the Substack due to financial considerations. God will provide. We're not worried about that. God's with us. So if you want to get that, just send me a direct message over on the Substack. But in that, we talked about several things to look for, such as the US entering the war. And that has happened very clearly with the bombing of those nuclear sites last night. So the United States has clearly entered the war. That's one of the things, probably the primary thing, that has kept Iran from closing the Strait of Hormuz up to this point. Because to do so would automatically uh, bring the United States into the war. Well, now that that's happened, that's no longer a hindrance for Iran to take that action. So, if you want to ask questions in the comment, feel free to put those in the live chat. I'll answer those as we get toward the end of this, but there's several things that I want to get to first. So I'll go back through the live chat and answer those questions as time comes up. And one of them is actually we're going to answer here in a minute on how they're going to go about doing that. So since that video yesterday, we've seen the United States enter the war. Then we've seen today the Iranian parliament voted to close the Strait of Hormuz. Now, there's no votes. That's just, for show. Ultimately, it's the Ayatollah's decision. So that right now, that's just something they're saying. They haven't moved to do that yet. I believe I would be really surprised, shocked if they do not do this, if they do not take these actions, because it's really the one thing that they can do, the one thing that has succeeded consistently for the Iranians since October 7th is closure of these waterways. So we have not seen that in the Strait of Hormuz yet. But again, we have seen that in the Red Sea. So one of the things that people will say was that I've seen all sorts of things on Twitter where people are discussing this and comments in other places, and they'll say, there's no way, they don't own the Strait of Hormuz, they can't close it. There's no way their Navy can blockade the Strait of Hormuz and the US Navy will destroy it. No doubt. But I would point out that Operation Prosperity Guardian was launched by the United States and 17 other nations with the express purpose in December 2023 of reopening the Red Sea to commercial shipping traffic after that had essentially been shut down by Houthi attacks on shipping throughout that lane, throughout the Red Sea area and that whole corridor, which again is 10 to 12% of global trade passes through the Suez Canal. So that's a big deal. And it's really one of the primary tasks of the US Navy to do that. And at the time they did that, we put out a video or an alert at that time and said, this will fail because we've entered a new era of drone warfare where conventional weapons are obsolete in the face of those drones. And at that time, I said, yes, Joe Biden's a weak president, but that's not why this will fail. And since then, we've had a new president, and it still failed. 18 months later, Red Sea traffic is 60 to 70% less than it was in 2022, 2023. So that has been a complete failure. Now, there's no reason to expect that the Houthi rebels can shut down the Red Sea, but Iran cannot shut down the Strait of Hormuz in the same way. So again, they're to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, we're not talking about a naval blockade or they sink a bunch of ships that make it impossible to pass. All they have to do is launch some missiles at ships, launch some drones at ships, harass the shipping, jam GPS signals, which is already taking place and has been taking place all week. We had a collision earlier in the week that caused a tanker to catch on fire as a result of that. So we're already seeing these disruptions taking place. And so they don't have to physically stop every ship. They just have to make it such a risky journey that insurance companies refuse to insure the cargo that's going through, or shipping companies refuse to put their crew at risk. So here's something that I would ask people in the chat, because again, people are saying they can't do this. Well, again, they've done it in the Red Sea. Now, I looked this up right before we came on. I think it's accurate. If not, it's fairly accurate. But how many ships do you think the Houthis have sunk since they started targeting shipping in the Red Sea in November 2023? So feel free to chime in the live chat. Let me know if you have a number of what you think that is. How many ships have they sunk that's caused Red Sea shipping traffic to just plummet, and it has not recovered? And the US Navy and all of its allies have been incapable of opening that waterway. So the answer, guys, is two. Two ships have been sunk, just two. One was boarded, taken over, and then several have been hit and damaged, but not sunk. But just those two is enough to have caused some of the biggest shipping companies in the world to completely avoid the Red Sea altogether. Now, there's an alternative route. They can go around the tip of southern Africa in order to get to the same place at much greater cost, at much greater length of time. Persian Gulf, there is no alternative sea route. There's one way in and one way out. 20% of all the oil in the world travels through that strait on a daily basis. So 20% of daily oil consumption goes through the Strait of Hormuz every day. And from a standpoint of how much of exports, oil exports, it's 40%. So this is a significant amount of the world's energy. Economic activity is directly correlated with energy usage. So if we see a 50% drop in shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, you're looking at potentially 10% of the world's oil supply being taken off the market. And that would make prices skyrocket. Right now, oil's around $75 a barrel. As of tonight, yep, right now 75.88 is what it's at this moment. So we could see oil prices go up into the triple digits very easily just from the threat of this. So we'll see if they follow through later tonight. If the Ayatollah says, yes, we're going to do this, all they have to do is just launch a missile at a ship. That'll send the price of oil up. They don't have to hit it. Don't have to sink it. Just the threat that threat alone is going to be enough if it's persistent for long enough that it will shut it down. That shipping companies will say, no, we're not going through there. We're not going to take a tanker with 1 to 2 million barrels of oil on it that no one wants to insure and ship it through this narrow waterway because at its narrowest point it's 21 miles across, but it's not even that. The amount where ships can fit through is really just a 2 to 4 mile wide area at its narrowest, and easily within range of drones and missiles from Iran. And again, people would say, well, no, the US Navy will stop that. They have not succeeded in 18 months in stopping Red Sea shipping traffic from being hounded by the Houthi rebels. And again, when that started, we made the point there's only two ways they could stop the Houthi attacks. One, they could nuke all of Yemen, yeah, just destroy it all. Number two, they could launch a ground invasion and go house to house and root out all those who are firing missiles and drones at the ships until they've conquered Yemen and made sure that that won't happen anymore. Neither one of those was an option that politically or in the eyes of the world the United States wanted to pursue. The same is going to be true here. The only way, if Iran makes the decision, we're going to do to the Persian Gulf what the Houthis have done to the Red Sea, the only way that can be stopped would be an invasion of Iran, a ground invasion of Iran. And I don't see really, Israel doesn't have that capability. The United States has that capability. Do they have the political will to do that? I don't know. And I've heard all sorts of people say, well, no, this isn't going to happen because Iran depends on its own oil exports. They'd never close the Strait of Hormuz. Well, again, they're not closing it, they're just harassing the shipping. And why would they fire missiles at their own oil exports? They wouldn't. Those are going to be allowed to freely pass. So that 30 to 40% of Red Sea shipping traffic that's been there, for the most part, is Chinese vessels, Russian vessels, those who are friendly to the Iranians and on their side. And so the same thing is true here. So China receives an enormous amount of oil from Iran, and they're going to want to continue receiving that. And the Strait of Hormuz can be shut down for the purposes of what Iran wants to achieve without hindering those shipments of oil to China. And if Iran says, you know what, we'll continue to sell you that oil, China, at today's prices, regardless of what the world market says, well, I'm sure China would be in agreement with that. So China is not going to stop this. They have no reason to stop this. In fact, China and Russia and others, and we'll talk about in a moment, have every reason to support Iran in this conflict. And so there's really no hindrance to them doing this or stopping them from doing this. Again, we hear a lot of threats and a lot of bluster coming from the United States, coming from Marco Rubio and Donald Trump on if Iran tries this, then we're going to do all these terrible things. They said the same things to the Houthis, and it still continued. And so why should we expect that this is going to be any different? Again, it's the only sustained success Iran has had for the last 2 years. I would be shocked, absolutely shocked, if they do not pursue this option. It's really the only card on the table they have left. Conventionally, they cannot compete against Israel and the United States. We're seeing how that's going. At least in a head-to-head conventional war, but in a war of attrition, which we'll talk about in a moment, that's something totally different. So, and then of course, in the midst of all of this, so we have the United States. Marco Rubio's come out and he's said, or urging China to dissuade Iran from doing this, from shutting the Strait of Hormuz. We don't want them to do so. It's clear they see that as a viable threat. They think China will do this. That remains to be seen. The Houthis have since come out after their attacks have lessened in the last few months, and they've said that they're going to start attacking U.S. ships in the Red Sea. So, in the Gulf of Aden as well. So, we'll see how this moves forward. But, guys, one of the things that people need to understand in this conflict is not over. So, thank you. I will see what I can. I don't know that I can do that live,
Okay.
but later I will. So, Jenny just handed me a question. Um, so, what we need to understand is what is the end game here? So, as we were returning from taking our daughter to camp last night, we're driving along, and that's when we get this news of the U.S. attack. Jenny first saw it on her
I
phone.
actually saw
She,
something before you
yep,
did.
she did. She was. So I was driving. She was able. She learned of this attack. So we turned on the radio, and the radio had, I believe it was Sean Hannity and Mark Levin were the ones speaking. This is the most fantastic victory for Trump. Trump's this great leader. All these wonderful things. Uh, you know, 4 decades of Iranian tyranny and sponsor of terrorism has come to an end. I'm thinking, has it? Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that Iran is a bad guy here, and we need to have this reign of terror come to an end. But this is celebrating victory prematurely. So, an objective has been achieved. So, Israel had an objective, the United States had an objective to bomb these nuclear facilities, to end the Iranian nuclear program, or at least set it back many years. According to what they tell us, they have achieved that objective. And there are other objectives as well that they haven't necessarily been as clear about, that it said they're still pursuing. But achieving that one objective does not end this conflict. It does not end this war. And you keep hearing all these people saying, okay, well, we've achieved this objective and now it's time for peace. Or to just a few moments ago, I was reading Netanyahu, the transcript of a speech he gave where he said, we're not going to allow this to be a war of attrition. We're going to achieve these objectives we have set out and then we're done. Well, that's great. But what if Iran's not done? so, so as long as the regime remains in place, the United States and Israel are not in a position to determine when the war is over. They can say our objectives have been achieved and we'd like for it to be over. But if Iran continues to attack, then the war is not over. And they're going to have to continue to engage in that conflict. And that is why we're hearing more and more. We heard earlier today, Trump sent out a Truth Social post about regime change in Iran. This has to become their objective now. And God willing, I'm going to put together an article on Tuesday for the Substack on why that is. Because otherwise, this becomes a war of attrition that becomes very difficult for Israel and the United States. Now, no doubt the Bible tells us Israel survives this. But that doesn't mean that what we've seen this weekend or this past week is the end of this. And so we could continue to see ballistic missiles incoming into Israel for who knows how long, weeks, months. How many interceptors does Israel have? The Iron Dome is wonderful and effective, but it's not 100% effective. Some of these are getting through. Some of these missiles are even hypersonic missiles that are getting through. And we're seeing destruction in multiple cities throughout Israel. Israel is small, very small compared to Iran in terms of not just landmass, but population. And Iran, even though this aerial bombardment's taking place, they could be resupplied by China, Pakistan, Russia, all sorts of other allies that they have. How long can this go on? And how long can Israel afford to continue moving down this? So, Israel is going to want to wrap this up very quickly. And that's why the objective, I believe, is regime change in Iran. And that's what they're going to be pursuing. Well, that creates an issue because now we have an enemy. We've been told, again, all this bluster that I'm hearing from a number of people who are claiming mission accomplished, victory achieved, is that Iran is not powerless. Iran is weakened, but they are not without options. And now you have a regime that's fighting for its very survival because they know now, well, the objective in this conflict is regime change. It's to get rid of us. So they're going to use everything they have at their disposal in order to prevent that. So, what are some of their options? Well, we've heard about sleeper cells, cyber attacks, but I believe the ones that should be most concerning to people, the number one most concerning to me is this scenario, and I haven't heard really anyone talk about this. All these missile barrages going toward Israel. What if they redirected those to oil production and processing facilities in the Middle East? So right across the Persian Gulf from Iran is a site called the Abqaiq Oil Production and Processing Facilities in Saudi Arabia. If a successful missile attack took out those facilities, we would lose 5% of global oil production for months. What if they simultaneously took out other oil production infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq? What would be the implications of that? Because so much of this oil production is even closer, it's in a shorter range than Israel is. And we've seen what they've been able to do with Israel. And Israel has this Iron Dome system. There's no such system protecting these oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. To take those out would cripple the global economy instantly. And it would cause a financial black swan event that, again, we talked about that yesterday's video on the Substack. We don't need to get into all of that right now. But this is the Achilles heel of the West, is the financial system. We've talked about how the economic power of the United States gives the United States the ability to project its power around the globe. And that ability to project power around the globe helps give the United States this world's global reserve currency and the economic power and might that it has. It's a symbiotic relationship. And both sides of that are under assault right now. This is a real possibility. We had, as part of the Houthi assault on the Red Sea, I believe it was a little over a year ago, the USS Gravely was within a second of being hit by a cruise missile when its last line of defense took that cruise missile out. So the idea that the US Navy will be able to move right in and dominate, yes, if they're going up Navy to Navy, sure, I think the US Navy would win that fight. But we're talking about a different type of fight. And, one of the things Jenny and I talked about last night, there's this scene from Gone with the Wind where it's right at the beginning of the war. And all the Southern gentlemen are gathered together and they're sharing stories about how quickly this war is going to be over. Oh, we're going to sweep through. It'll be over in a matter of weeks or months. Clark Gable's character is standing over the side saying, wait a second, guys. I've seen the industrialization of the North. They're not the weak opponent you think they are. And again, I think there are a lot of people that are underestimating the capabilities of Iran and what they could do. What happens if a carrier group goes in to defend the Strait of Hormuz and a hypersonic missile goes through the deck of an aircraft carrier? That's a possibility. They had a war game 15 years ago at the Pentagon. It was this exact scenario. And Iran launched a preemptive strike with cruise missiles and took out half the naval assets. And they stopped the war game and they said, wait, no, do over. That would never happen. Right. So we've got a lot of people that think, well, this couldn't possibly happen. The United States is dominant. The United States can't fail in these things, but we need to be careful and understand this war is not over. The Ayatollah remains in power. This regime remains in power. I believe the objective of the war going forward, if it wasn't from the very beginning for Israel and the United States, is regime change. And so that will be what they pursue. But again, short of a ground invasion, that's going to be very difficult to achieve. And then you get into the scenario of how long does this go on? And as it becomes, the longer it goes on in duration, the more difficult it becomes. And Iran has a lot of options, again, to close the Strait of Hormuz. Again, they're not closing a gate that doesn't allow ships to go through the waterway. They're simply harassing the shipping of anyone who's allied with Israel until people choose not to send their ships through the Strait of Hormuz. And that would skyrocket the price of oil, cripple the global economy, and set off a contagion throughout the financial markets that would we would all be aware of very quickly. So guys, this is a big deal. This war is not over yet, so don't believe any of these people that are saying, "Oh no, this is this tremendous victory and it's over and Iran is done." Unfortunately, that's not the case until it is. Until this regime is gone, this is not the case. And we have other powerful countries lined up that have the opposite goal of that regime change that the United States and Israel have. China does not want to see regime change because they have tremendous influence with Iran right now. Russia does not want to see regime change. Russia does not want a pro Western Iran right on its doorstep, which is what they would have. They don't want to lose that ally. And so we saw earlier today, there was a news story from Dmitry Medvedev, who was former president of Russia. He's one of Putin's closest allies. And he said that other countries might be willing to supply nuclear warheads to the Iranians. So guys, this has the ability to draw in other parties as well. So just as we saw it was Israel on Iran, and now the United States joined as of yesterday officially, not just behind the scenes. What happens if some of these other nations join as well? So I don't think this is going to become World War III. It's not going to We're not going to see a World War I scenario where one nation after another joins and soon the whole world's at war. But I do believe we will see this go. This is going to go on a lot longer than people think. It is not over yet. And we could see a closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which I believe many people are unaware of as even a possibility. And those who are, I think, don't really understand the implications and what that means. Imagine $10, $15 a gallon gasoline. What does that mean for your budget, for the economy? We talked about this again some in yesterday's video. We would see a skyrocketing oil price, but it wouldn't necessarily stay up there. It would go back down in a matter of months, but it would go down in a matter of months as a result of plummeting demand because the global economy is in depression, in a severe depression. So we saw something very similar happen back in 2008. We saw the all-time high in July 2008 in US dollar priced oil of $147 a barrel. 4 months later it was 30. And that was the result of that surge in price. Many people say, "Well, this is inflationary." Well, no, it's not inflationary. It's a matter of it's a supply shock causes the price of that to go up. But if people's wages aren't going up, inflation is a phenomenon of the currency and currency printing. That would cause people's wages to go up as well. But if people's wages don't go up, well, they have to have gasoline, but they don't have to have that new iPhone. They're going to buy the gasoline and not the iPhone. And that's the case with any of these discretionary items that you don't have to have. So people would be buying the things they have to have, like food and fuel, and staying away from the things they don't have to have. And then people start experiencing job loss as a result of those companies that are providing those discretionary items to people. They're no longer getting the orders coming in. And so this could have enormous repercussions for the economy globally. It's a way that Iran can put leverage on Israel and the United States because by doing this, they can then turn around and say, "We didn't want to do this. It's Israel's and the United States' fault. If they hadn't have done what they had done, we wouldn't have had to do this." And there are a lot of nations that'll be willing to go along with that and believe that because they want the pressure of those high oil prices to go away. They want the oil to freely flow again. So they'll be providing pressure on the United States and Israel to implement a ceasefire to leave the Iranian regime in power. So we're going to see all these different players pushing in these different ways to get the outcome that they want. This is far from over. So, guys, we need in preparing for this. There's not a whole lot you can do to prepare for this. I mean, unless you live on a farm and you've got a big tank for diesel or gasoline, where if you have something like that or a big heating oil tank, probably not a bad idea to fill it up today while it's available and while it's at a relatively low price. Doesn't mean it won't be at a lower price sometime later, but you also have a good chance that it could be much higher. But be resilient. We've talked about looking at different things. What happens if there's a cyber attack and you can't get water? Water no longer comes out of your faucet. Where are you going to get it from? Start thinking about those things. Becoming resilient. Be situationally aware when you go to church. Be aware of who's there, who's coming in the door. Be just alert to things around you because we're in a very high risk situation right now. As far as gasoline, we could see skyrocketing prices. So probably not a bad idea to top off your tank as long as those prices remain low, because we don't know when they'll go back up. After that, there's not much we can do. I don't think it's likely we'll see shortages through this, but we'll see probably very high prices that'll then go down as a result of the economy and depression. So pray, be in the word, be prepared spiritually and emotionally for what may lie ahead. Hopefully, I'm wrong about all of this. Hopefully, the Iranian regime falls tonight and none of this happens. Or perhaps they go to the negotiating table but I doubt that. I really seriously doubt that that's going to happen. I think really we're looking at there's either regime change or there's not. And if there's not, we're going to see closure of the Strait of Hormuz. at the very least. And again, maybe even attacks on oil facilities. Again, they talk about attacks on US troops throughout the Middle East. That's a possibility, certainly. But that's not going to have the same impact as if they took out the Kike facility in Saudi Arabia. To do that would have immediate repercussions on a global scale, and everybody would know about it very quickly. So, guys, these are things we need to be paying attention to. We need to be praying over this, um, because this could escalate very quickly from here. It's already escalated from what we were just talking about yesterday. So we've already seen two of those steps. Again, the US entering the conflict takes away one, basically the only thing that was holding Iran back from taking this action in the Strait of Hormuz. And then now we've had the Iranian parliament come out and call for it. It's the only thing that they've consistently succeeded at doing. Therefore, it would be really foolish for them not to pursue that action. And so we should expect that they will. So let me scroll through the chat, see if I see any questions that people have asked. I don't know if you can hear that. So Pookie, she's trying to work on that. Let's see. So I've got one question here. So Jenny wrote some of these up for me. So it says, I'm freaked out about the rapture, hate flying and heights, afraid I'll pass out. Will I know if I'm flying up or will it be a snap? Well, the Bible says the twinkling of an eye, so the blink of an eye, will be transformed. I doubt that you'll have any sense of fear at that moment. I think you're gonna, I don't like heights either. She'll know that. Snakes and heights. Now snakes, I don't get paralyzed around snakes. I just don't like them. So if I see a snake, that snake's gonna die, right? And I don't have a problem flying because I'm not in control, right? I'm like, well, if the plane crashes, I'll be in heaven, right? But if we're on the side of the roof or something, and my own clumsiness could cause me to fall, then I'm like paralyzed. So I sympathize with you, but I don't think that you'll feel fear in the rapture. I think that it will be a time of great joy. Are we in danger of sleeper cells? I think yes. I mean, we can't discount that, but again, I think that's probably overblown by the media. Doesn't mean that it won't happen. But again, from Iran's standpoint, what's more likely to work? Some sleeper cell attacks in the United States, is that going to cause people to go, we give up? Iran, have your way? Or shutting down a significant portion of the world's oil supply and going before the world and saying, it'll all come back if you tell Israel and the United States to back off. So I think it's the latter is the more powerful option that Iran has at its disposal. So sleeper cells, there's certainly a danger of that. That's why I said to be situationally aware, be alert to your surroundings whenever you're in public, because there could be a danger from that. Let's see what else we got. How would an all-out war impact the US's global economy? I always hear war is good for making dollars. Would it help or hurt? So again, all-out war itself may not necessarily hurt the economy. Because we've certainly had plenty of wars in the last 30, 40, 50, 100 years. Oil at $150 a barrel or $200 a barrel or $300 a barrel would cause every single economy in the world to contract simultaneously, instantaneously. And it would cause a number of issues. So in yesterday's video, we went over one of those. So Japan is an area we've talked about that is a really the epicenter of the coming global financial crisis. They have a currency crisis. No matter what route they choose, their economy will be destroyed. And it's the fourth largest economy in the world. So that has repercussions for the entire global financial system. They import 97% of their oil. So if the price of oil goes up significantly, they're going to be impacted uh, very negatively and even more so than other places. So we pointed out in that video the exchange rate, and printing these yen. So oil is priced in dollars still for the most part. And so oil being priced in dollars, if oil goes back to its all-time high in dollars, it would be more than 30% beyond its all-time high in yen based on the current exchange rate. And so there's a whole bunch of things. Again, we went into those in yesterday's video that would come about as a result of that. But we would see uh, all sorts of collapses of hedge funds and all these derivative bets. And we would see a replay of the 2008 2009 financial crisis on steroids if they're successful in negatively impacting shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, and we see sustained triple digit oil prices, especially mid triple 150 or above for a sustained length of time is going to it's going to crush the global economy. Do you think there's many sleeper Iranian sleeper cells in the US since Trump took over again? I don't know how many there are again. I think that's probably an overblown by the media. Yeah, it's quite possible. There's probably a whole lot of sleeper cells, not just Iranian sleeper cells, but Chinese sleeper cells and others in the country. But I think that the threat to the free flow of oil in that region is the bigger issue that we need to look at because we need to look at incentives here. Again, what does Iran gain other than revenge by implementing sleeper cell attacks versus what does it gain by harassing shipping lanes in the Persian Gulf and then turning to the world and saying all of this pain can stop immediately if you just make the United States and Israel stop and leave us alone. So I think that's the most likely option. What are your thoughts about Iran using asymmetric warfare like a cyber attack or hack? Again, quite possible. I wouldn't rule it out. We know that they have tested these things on US water systems and power systems in the past. So they've been preparing for an event like this. So we could see something like that, where maybe they do something like that against the United States and push for the citizens to politically try to stop this. Thank you. So, have you heard anything about getting oil from Alaska? Well, there's a lot of oil in Alaska, a lot of untapped supplies, but again, if the Strait of Hormuz is shut down tomorrow, let's say that and again, guys, we have seen there were two tankers in the Gulf about to traverse through the Strait of Hormuz when these attacks took place yesterday, and they did U-turns and came back because of the threat. And so I can't believe that they're alone and that it'll probably take some days for some of this information to come out that this is what's happening and that this traffic is plummeting. But if that's the case, it's not a matter of replacing that oil from you can't just turn on a spigot somewhere and more oil comes out. There's all sorts of different grades of oil and it has to be refined and there's so many different issues and the key is it's not necessarily where the oil is coming from. Because I've heard some people say, well, the United States, what oil it does import doesn't come from the Persian Gulf anymore. Doesn't matter. The price of oil is set on the global market. And so if we have a supply disruption of any significance anywhere in the world, the prices go up everywhere. That's just It's a global market, so it really doesn't matter. So they could go digital fast. Not sure necessarily the context of that question. Digital currencies, perhaps. Yes, if again, we've talked about the aftermath of the coming financial crisis. They're going to roll out as the solution central bank digital currencies, tokenized assets, and digital IDs. A system that's indistinguishable in capability and function from the mark of the beast system. They've already told us they're rolling that out in less than 4 months. They've said they're going to roll out a digital euro. In some places, they've already rolled out digital currencies. So no doubt this would if this happens, this financial crisis we've been talking about is here. It's no longer something we're talking about. When's it coming? It's here. So it's just a matter of wait and see in the coming days what happens. So hopefully there's regime change and a very friendly new government comes in Iran that doesn't want to attack its neighbors, doesn't want to build uh, nuclear warheads and destroy Israel, and we have peace. I think on the other side of this, and we'll, again, God willing, in tomorrow's video, we're going to talk about the prophetic implications of what's going on. I think in the aftermath of all of this, we're going to see the peace of that precedes Ezekiel 38:39. We're going to see Israel in a straight state of tranquility. The question we need to ask is how quickly did they get there and what happens in between then and now? Do we see Psalm 83, which some think isn't a prophecy at all? I believe that it is of a future war. Isaiah 17, do we see those play out before we get to that point? Because again, this war is not over. You know, one objective, maybe a few more have been achieved, but that's different from victory in a war with a clear exit strategy and everything's peaceful and wonderful. This war has not ended yet. So let me scroll through, see if I see any other questions. Yeah, I see one in here. Pookie mentioned we have the round table coming up on Wednesday. So Wednesday we'll have the usual prophecy roundtable on AI and technology. So feel free to join us at that time. Now, normally that's 7 p.m. Eastern time. Due to some scheduling issues, it's going to be 7:30 Eastern time. So just make note of that. It'll be me and John Haller, Scott Townsend, Patrick Wood, and a new addition, David Bowen, is going to join us as well because Tom couldn't make it and Pete had a conflict as well. So let's see. Are we to the when you see these things happen, lift up your head, your redemption draws near yet? That's from Allison. Yeah, that doesn't mean that tonight is the rapture, but I believe we've been at that point for quite some time because the context of Jesus saying that was is Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, specifically Luke 21:28. He says, when you begin to see all these things happen, meaning the things he had just told his disciples, as well as what the prophets had said, to look for about the time at the end, the time just before his coming, know that I'm near. In other words, Jesus is saying, it's not 5 centuries and then I'll come back. Or if people repent the way Nineveh did, then I won't come back. Right. Now he doesn't, there are no other, he's just saying, when you see these things take place, I'm right at the door. And I believe we've been there. We're right at the door. Any moment, Jesus will come back for the church. And we're seeing how close we are to this tribulation period. So, based on the stage setting we see all around us. So what will this do to our fuel prices? So again, if we see the price of a barrel of oil double, it won't necessarily double the price of gasoline, but it'll come pretty close. And depending again on how much shipping is disrupted and for how long, again, you could see substantially high gasoline prices. So where it's different everywhere because they have different, if you're here in the United States, Europe, wherever, there's different taxes, there's different uh, refining processes that need to take place. Like, for instance, in Virginia and California, they have a totally different standard, and so the price there is higher for this for because the fuel is different. So here we were paying about $3 a gallon before this conflict started. Now it's like, I don't know, 3.20. But we could see in Virginia 10, 12, $15 a gallon. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Now again, if you had the ability to prepare to store fuel, probably not a bad idea. If you have the ability to have, you should have a deep pantry anyway. But anything you can do to make yourself resilient, so maybe you don't have to travel, because I don't think we're going to see that for a prolonged period of time. Because what's going to happen again is it's going to crush economic activity, and then those prices will drop back down. So we'll see that supply demand come back into equilibrium. But either way, that's not necessarily a good thing that we see lower prices because of the depression. So let me scroll through, see what else we have. Um, Yeah, so not necessarily a question, but an announcement. So uh, Tuesday, the 24th, will be 19 years that we have been married. So we will take another trip that day with no kids.
That's what we think.
We think. We think. We'll see what happens. Let's see. We have, what would your next move be if you were Iran? Close the strait. So, question mark. Close. Would it be to close the strait? My my next move, and I certainly hope that this isn't what they do, but I would send off signals that I'm going to continue attacking Israel and that maybe I was going to attack U.S. Military installations in the region. And in secret, I would be targeting all the oil production facilities, especially uh, the Abqaiq facility in Saudi Arabia, because it's such an enormous portion of global supply. And I'd send a barrage of missiles and try to take it out instantly before anyone knew what I was doing, and could then try to go out and stop it, because I could harass the shipping. Maybe they do invade, maybe aerial attacks, cut down my ability to do that and hinder that ability. But if I take out those facilities, those aren't being put back online tomorrow. It's going to take months, if not longer. And so that is what I would do. And then I would announce that any ships associated with Israel and the United States would come under attack if they pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Just that announcement alone would send oil prices going up. And then again, they don't have to sink those ships, just fire missiles at them, drones at them. Even if they get shot down, we talked about this for 18 months. This is a can't. What's happened in the Red Sea is a can't lose proposition. I send a $10,000 drone. You shoot it down with a $2 million missile. I can do that for a really long time. And I'm winning just by the fact that you're shooting my $10,000 drone down with a $2 million missile, and you're expending that missile. And then if the attack's successful and you don't shoot it down, well, then I've managed to damage that ship, maybe even sink that ship. But again, as we pointed out earlier, the Red Sea traffic is down 60 to 70%. and they've only sunk 2 ships in over 18 months. So it does you don't have to sink every ship that comes through, just the threat of it and the persistent, attacks, the persistent harassment is enough that would, uh, cause the price of oil to skyrocket, and again, that would hit directly at the United States, the global financial system, all of that. Have here Hormuz would be impossible for Iran to close in their area, yes, out of their legal jurisdiction. However, U.S. Navy will powerhouse them as primary function. Fifth Fleet is transport of oil cargo. Again, the United States Navy was given a task back in December 2023. Operation Prosperity Guardian, open up the Red Sea. They failed. We're 18 months later, two presidential administrations, they have failed to do that. That shipping is still down 60 to 70%. It'll probably be down 100%, but Iran's letting their friends pass through unhindered. The Houthis aren't attacking the Chinese and the Russians. And the same would be true in the Strait of Hormuz. So I have to disagree. No, again, Iran isn't going to close the Strait of Hormuz and erect a barrier and no ships can pass through. What they're going to do is they're going to make it such a high risk venture for the West to transport oil and then through the Strait of Hormuz that they choose not to do it. They're just not going to do it, and then that's going to send those prices of oil up all over the globe. Um, why aren't we pumping more Texas oil? So in the United States in general, a lot of what we have left is shale oil. There's a lot more people not more knowledgeable about this than me, but here's the thing: we will pump more at a higher price, right? So for instance, in Russia, I believe it's like $9. They're the lowest cost producer of oil on the planet. I think they can bring up a barrel of oil at $9 at a profit. In the United States, I think in most areas that's around $60 because it's different types of oil. There's different methods for going after it. So it costs more in different places depending on what you're dealing with. And so at a higher price, we will pump more. But then that becomes the cure for higher prices is higher prices, right? So you have the higher prices, you get less demand, and you get more oil production over time. And over time, you see those prices come back down. But then it creates the same issues again, and we see the prices go back up. So we see them go up and down and up and down and up and down. But here they would skyrocket very quickly and probably break a lot of things in the financial system as well. So let's see. Question: could closing the Strait of Hormuz be the final straw that could start a crash beginning with Japan? Yes, absolutely. If we see sustained disruption of oil supplies from the Strait of Hormuz, we will see, not we will see a global financial crisis, and Japan will be at the epicenter as 97% of their oil is imported. And, uh, they're they've been able to keep this financial crisis at bay because they can the United States can print all the dollars they want. Bank of Japan can print all the yen they want. And the European Central Bank can print all the euros they want. So, for instance, 2 years ago, we saw Silicon Valley Bank fail, and we saw second, third, and fourth largest bank failures in U.S. history. And as Janet Yellen said, we were on the verge of seeing bank runs all over the global financial system. They were able to bail those banks out by printing more dollars and infusing those dollars into those banks so they wouldn't fail. That's when the problem is a lack of dollars. They can print all the dollars they want. But when the problem is a lack of oil, politicians and central banks cannot print oil at will. And so they can't solve the problem. They can't kick the can down the road. The crisis gets out of control. It gets beyond their control. And so that's why this is such a threat, is because there is no way to uh, get around this. You either have oil or you don't. So let's see what else we have in here. Question: is it with Iranian subs that lay mines, that be their only option in closing the strait? So that's from Nelson. That's one possibility. So one thing we don't hear about in the media at all, really, is there is an Iranian navy. They have diesel-powered submarines that are domestically made, as well as those they've uh, gotten from the Russians, and they have the ability to fire torpedoes, missiles, and lay mines. And much of the Strait of Hormuz is shallow area. There's only certain areas that are passable by ships. So laying mines, even though we have minesweepers that can get rid of those, it's again, it that doesn't happen instantaneously. And so it takes some time to do that. In the meantime, there can be other things harassing these ships. And so just the threat of that is enough to send the oil prices skyrocketing. So we have those things. Yes, that's one possibility for pushing back uh, shipping out of the Strait of Hormuz, but we also have jamming of GPS signals and the ability to navigate using those GPS signals. We have what the Houthis have primarily done is fire cruise missiles and drones at these ships. And that alone has been probably the bread and butter of the Houthi attacks. I would expect the same to happen here because you can move those around. You can hide those drones and missiles in buildings off the coastline, move them all around. So it's not a clear target. And so, despite massive bombardments by the United States, the United Kingdom, and Israel, we still see the Houthis able to carry out those attacks. Question: don't laugh. I'm serious here. I'm free. Oh, we already answered that one. So,
Yeah, I think your next one, our brother Bill Salas thinks the next prophecy to be fulfilled is in Jeremiah 49 regarding Elon and Winnecree.
yeah, I don't know enough about that to. So I would defer to Bill Salas is the expert in that area. I know he's been writing about that for many years. So I don't know if that's the next one to be fulfilled or not. Again, we'll talk more about that tomorrow about the prophetic significance of what this war is. But one way or another, I think on the other side of all of this, we end up with the state of tranquility and peace that we read about, and I believe it's Ezekiel 38, verse 11. So if you want to go look at that original language, that's a state that we have not seen Israel in since its rebirth in 1948. So, and that's why what we're seeing now is not Ezekiel 38, 39. It's not the Gog of Magog invasion. So Russia is not going to join with Turkey and others and come to Iran's aid and send this overwhelming army. That will happen at a later time, quite possibly as the aftermath of this leads to that state of peace, where it's unexpected for that to happen. Thank you. So we've got isn't part of the U.S. Navy
Can you read already?
remit?
Yeah.
Is that to keep trade routes open? So yes. So there's really two primary functions of the U.S. Navy: protect the United States and clear the world's waterways, make them safe for free trade, freely navigable for free trade. So we've talked about how this plays into the United States and the US dollar having the world's reserve currency status. So in the 19th century, the British Navy ruled the high seas. The sun never set on the British Empire. They had military bases all over the world, naval bases all over the world. They kept the world's trade routes open so that they were freely navigable for world trade. And London was the center of international finance, and the British pound was the world's reserve currency. In the aftermath of World War One, they were no longer capable of carrying that out. So there was this short interregnum period, but basically the baton was passed to the United States. So for the 20th century, we've had, you know, aftermath of World War One, we've essentially had the U.S. Navy ruling the world's high seas. Certainly in the since the aftermath of World War Two, we've had that, with the United States having military bases all around the world, able to project its military power all over the globe. The center of international finance is New York, and the US dollar is the world's global reserve currency. So we see all of that uh, come under threat recently in the last several years from both sides, from the inability of the United States to project that military power, to not use it. Used to be just the threat of US naval power made people stop doing whatever they were doing. And now we've seen 18 straight months of a band of rebels has stood up to the mighty United States as well as all of their allies, and the shipping in the Red Sea has not returned to pre-Houthi levels. So, um, it's a sign of the waning power of the United States, which is what we would expect to see in the last days of the last days. So,
There's one
which
question.
another one? Do I should I just scroll down toward the bottom?
Yeah.
Let me see. Question. Thank you for everything you do, Britt. With everything going on around the world, what is of the greatest concern to you? And I don't mean out of fear, but what are you paying attention to? Right now, I would think I think it's this very thing that we're talking about. Um, for quite some time, it's been we're on the precipice in so many places of financial collapse, not just in the United States, but all around the world. China's in a deflationary spiral, second largest economy in the world. Third largest economy in the world is Germany. They've been in contraction for 3 straight years. And we talked about Japan, the fourth largest economy in the world, is on the verge of obliteration. We'd see every economy instantly shrunk if this happens. And we have $2 to 4 quadrillion in derivatives. So we would see this whole financial system collapse. And they're telling us they want to roll out this digital system. And so that's been of the greatest concern. We've actually talked about this threat multiple times over the past year and a half to 2 years. So uh, last year, I wrote a couple of articles that mentioned this is a flashpoint where we could see everything change instantly if the Strait of Hormuz is shut down. So I would say this should be at the top of everyone's list of concerns. And then as part of that too, it's not just oil, but fertilizer is an issue as well. We saw that with the Russia-Ukraine war. So a lot of nitrogen fertilizers are made they're byproducts of this oil process, both in Russia and Iran. And so that could have implications for the global food supply as well if there's a long-term disruption. I think is that it? Is there anything else on here? I think that may be it, guys. So this is over an hour, so I don't want to keep anybody any longer. But thank you for joining. Um, again, I see John Haller had a really good update today too. That's from Just Vicky. Yes, absolutely, and I believe in John's update as well. Both at the beginning and the end, he said the same thing. He said, "There's a lot of people prematurely declaring victory here. This is not over yet. So for this to be over, we either need a lasting ceasefire and Iranian abandonment of its nuclear program. I think that's probably a less than 1% chance we'll see that. Or we need to see regime change in Iran to a regime that's not worse, right? To one that's hopefully not going to attack its neighbors or set as its mission the destruction of Israel. So that's what we need to see. Until that happens, there is no victory in this war. Yes, it's an objective was achieved in taking out those nuclear facilities. But achieving an objective is not winning a war or ending a war. And once that war starts, you don't get to determine when it ends unilaterally. So if you if the one you're attacking, you say, well, it's over, and they say, no, it's not. Well, then it's not. It continues to go on until you both agree it's over, or one of you is defeated and has no say in it. So thanks again for joining, guys. I
Special
appreciate it.
thanks to Lori and Pookie.
Special thanks to Lori and Pookie and just everybody in the comments. So
We love you guys.
love you guys, and again, stay tuned for tomorrow. We'll be looking at the prophetic significance of all this, God willing. And until we'll talk to you then.